All right, we are back on Facebook Live, and we're also back on YouTube. Folks, this is part two. Andy Berglund, national team coach for the World Baseball Classic South African team, the manager. We're continuing our conversation. We're going to talk about the area that we finished off with a little bit because there's a lot to talk about there about taking your practices and make them as realistic as possible. So let's continue that, Andy. Anything else you want to throw in there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking back to what we were getting ready for when it came to the World Baseball Classic a couple weeks ago. Like, we had to get our guys ready in a semifinal game, and these guys had just come off of a season in South Africa, and like the South African league is competitive, but like they don't see the velocity and the speed of the game. So how do you in a short amount of time try to simulate a speed of the game that they're not used to for the last 6 months is what I was thinking about as a manager. And so what we were just trying to do was basically back it up to the basic things that we wanted to be really good at in the tournament, which was scoring runs, like in the batting practice, scoring runs from third base, and pumping good BP in there, so it felt like their timing had to be short and quick to get it, and then being really good in two strike situations, because we knew we would be in a lot of those in the games, and then like knowing, I guess, in advance, what the other teams brought to the table in terms of speed, and then like taking and trying to make the speed of the practice faster for them, because we were, to be honest with you, we were a little bit behind the eight ball coming in. Like, our visas were held up for the guys, so we had a short amount of window to train. We were not going to get in like live games like we needed to beforehand. So in the live games is the best way to say, okay, that guy threw 95. Like, how close were you to not hitting it or hitting it, and getting ready for these guys and the timing of it, because that is something that you have to obviously work on is what type of timing they have to pitchers, that we're going to face. So speeding the game up, shortening everything down, making sure the pitchers feel also that in their bullpens they're feeling game like. We did like I like to do this even at the senior level, like where there's a bit of a feeling of consequence. If you give away a run in a game, like it could cost you the game, or if there's a critical mental mistake or whatever. So we would even do that with the senior guys when we would, do something that wasn't part of our plan and execution. There was a small consequence. And even at the senior level, you see guys say, okay, coaches are taking practice just as serious as a game. I think that's important, especially in a short amount of time. You can't just go through the motions. You got 2 days before one of the biggest games of your life in 4 years. So we got to get you mentally prepared. And so the guys that were going through the motions you could find and single out. So we did a lot of team stuff that it felt like if we didn't execute, there was a bit of a consequence. Not like we're going to sprint, you know, 10 sprints or anything like that, but a small consequence goes a long way. I learned a long time ago the fastest way to a player's head is through his feet sometimes. I don't know if
Mm.
you ever heard that, but like a
Yeah.
little
Yes.
bit of running or a little bit of consequence to not executing saw the shift go and the focus go pretty early. So that's something all coaches got to kind of work with, depending on who they have, depending on what their league level is like, depending on the competition they're about to face. Like it's a feeling about where we're at and then the opponent you're going to face. And I would always go, when I was in Uganda, I'd always try to train those guys. I was like, hey, tomorrow we're going to play Team Japan or Team USA under 18s. And I was like, if you play the way you're playing, I don't know if we're going to get through the first inning. And
Wow.
then like there was like this feeling, okay, let's see if we can get them to rise to a higher level, even out of practice, challenge them. So
I like that. So you can almost simulate like you're playing Team Japan, where they're doing a little bit more bunting, more hit and run
always,
and then the defense is working on there. I love that. I love to hear that a lot. Now, there's a lot of challenges you have when it comes to South Africa. You had to go to Arizona because I wanted to get into that. You flew to Arizona. You
yep,
started. You had a few days, 4 or 5 days of training. Then obviously things got postponed. And folks, postponed meaning that the Olympics is going to be held in 2021, the same time period, July 23rd, right around that period, and which means the qualifiers, not only for the World Baseball Classic, but the Olympics, those are going to be played. So we're going to have some great baseball. It's just going to be a lot of baseball in a short period of time. But
yep,
while you're in Arizona, you had to, I mean, we hear this a lot now. The number one thing for athletes is the ability to, number one, is to get their sleep. And that time change you had to have, from South Africa to get in there, to get accustomed. What'd you guys do when it came to that to try to help your athletes? Anything?
So, and that's where Chad Gravenors came in. So Chad joined us from MLB, and he's an unbelievable mind when it comes to that kind of stuff. Called just acclimating to the time zone difference and then the travel. I mean, it's 6 hours difference between South Africa and the East Coast. So that's what 9 hour difference in Arizona. So it's like almost like a full day for those guys, or half day. Um, so he put together a program before they left to try to get them, like nutritionally, like ready to go the last couple of weeks. And then as soon as they landed in Arizona, they were obviously tired. It was a long trip for those guys all the way from Cape Town or Joburg to finally Arizona. And we had to keep them awake, like we had to keep them awake to get used to, because most of them got in around 5 o'clock or something. So it's right away trying to get their bodies used to this new time zone. And it was also, Arizona was already hot, hot weather and stuff.
Oh,
So
sure.
it was hotter than Cape Town. So it's all these things you don't really think about. But if you have a professional that is really good at that, like you have an unbelievable resource. And so he had already put together a plan. And I mean, our guys were really, it took them a few days to get used to it. I mean, it's usually, I think it's 9 days to get over a 9 hour time difference, and we didn't have 9 days.
Right.
So we were encouraging them and to get their rest, obviously, and sneak in some small naps. But at the same time, we were trying to get a practice in and
Yeah.
a practice under the lights, because we were going to play under the lights our first game. So all these evolving factors that you're like, okay, this is comfortable being uncomfortable here, boys. Like
Yeah.
let's and they were tired. Like by the end of the night, there was a lot of guys tired. There was a lot of guys going to see the trainer, like early on in the trip, just
Hmm.
because they weren't used to that professional everyday type of schedule. And we were making it work, but it took us, obviously, it took us the first 3-4 days to really start to feel like we were closer. Let's put
Hmm.
it that way. So now that you know that going forward, and then hopefully they reschedule this, and we're just better prepared, and we get to Arizona a little bit earlier, get acclimated, get the games in, and then, we're in better shape. So,
One challenge you have obviously is that your guys can't play together that long, obviously, because they've got their season in South Africa and it's spread out. But the second challenge I think is big, is taking your pitching staff and having a program on how they're going to pitch, when they're going to pitch, and that could change along the way. Give us an idea of what your game plan was a little bit, because I mean, we know it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to just be 1, 2, 3 and
right.
it works that way, but it could help other coaches in the way they're working some of their ideas in their tournaments and situations.
So, I mean, it's a unique situation for South Africa. The regular season runs from October to March. So it's flipped, like Australia is the same way, where they play during our US winter time they're playing. So a lot of these guys, the pitchers especially, were in end of the season shape. So their arm strength was pretty good. They're able
Good.
to recover better. Um, so we were hopeful that a lot of those guys were going to be able to go. And again, that just depends on the program they're on. Obviously, if you have a good program, no matter where you're at in the world, the pitcher should be able to recover in a couple days. And the WBC qualifier rules were pitch count. So I mean, if you went over 85 pitches, you had to rest 4 days. That was one of the big ones. So we were really aware of that and trying to figure out how do we utilize our best pitchers, where if we need to go that route, what we're going to plan on doing for the next game, or if we shorten that route, who comes in, how do we save his pitches so that he could possibly go the next day. All these strategies that you're thinking about in a short tournament, where you
Wow.
can have your best arms available for 2-3 games, like, because if you win 2 games at this tournament, you're in. And that's a crazy thought process for a national team, a small country, to say, we're 2 games away from going and playing against Japan, USA, and Canada. And so those like strategic decisions on who you're going to use and how many innings you're going to use them, so you can save him. If he gets only 2 days rest, he can come back. Trust me,
Yeah.
Pete, that
The
was
way you
that
And
was
those wheels got to be turning constantly during the games
yeah,
because again, things can change. Now do you decide, do I take them past that 85 because I need to win this game, or do
exactly.
I have somebody else who can finish? I mean, there's so many things.
Yeah.
And on the other flip side too, Andy, is not only do you have that type of schedule, and I know you have a game plan going in, and then you got to possibly change that game plan along the way. But what do you do to try to get the guys to recover faster? Now, I know they can't pitch certain days, but what can they do to give advice to some of our coaches out there to recover a little quicker?
Again, like there's as soon as they're done throwing, there should be something that they're doing to like already think about their recovery. Obviously, you got to have active rest. They have to. I'm used to the MLB camps where as soon as the pitcher was done throwing, he'd start doing some J band work to kind of recover his shoulder capsules, doing a little bit of running, and then from the next day on, there was a program for him to get back to the next day, and sometimes I know with Bill Homework a lot, the guys would throw a little bit the next day just to see where they were at. I mean, it's just really important to see if they're sore, if they're
Sure.
hurting.
And
You know what I'm
everybody's a
saying?
little different, right?
Absolutely. It's
And I know,
individual as
and I
well.
know
Like,
Jaeger talks about I can't remember the term, but know your arm or know your body.
absolutely.
So maybe one guy feels that he's throwing, he starts to play a little catch. He doesn't feel right. Maybe he takes that day off and starts the
Yeah.
next day throwing.
Yeah. Well, like we talked about with Chad, our strength coordinator, like he basically breaks it down to like a green, a yellow, or a red type of feeling for the player.
Mhm.
Like every day, how are you feeling? You green, yellow, red. So the pitcher is like, let's say he threw 40 pitches that first day. Like you got to come back and say, okay, how are you feeling the next day? And if he's like a green, we're like, okay, he's feeling good. Like we have a potential to use him back to back days. But if he's yellow or red, we're like, okay, this is better to rest him, obviously, so that he gets back to a green. And if that takes another day of rest, it's to our advantage. And for especially younger coaches, I mean, I've heard a lot of your podcasts, and that's personal to me. Like I've had shoulder problems since I was younger because of just not knowing the right mechanics and overthrowing, and then eventually having growth plates that were issues when I was older. And this is stuff I didn't know about when I was a kid.
Mhm.
So when I listen to these podcasts, I'm always thinking about like if I was a coaching me at 15, and I was in a tournament and I was like, okay, I'm in the final. My best guy is pitched yesterday. Do I use him again? Type of thing. And like I'm like in the short term, it's a trophy, right? In the long term, it could be a disaster. So I think about that a lot with all the pitchers. Like it's a $1 billion industry, Tommy John industry, isn't it? Isn't it like a
Yes,
$1 billion industry?
absolutely.
Crazy, and it's starting at a young age. So I take it personal when it comes to teaching the throwing mechanics and the pitcher's overuse. And I've made mistakes in the past, not like trying to win too hard versus okay, this kid's got another 15 years of baseball in him. Not I don't want him to have only 15 more minutes. So that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, and I think we need to train our coaches around the world to think the same way because, I remember recently, not too long ago, being in Bulgaria, great bunch of people and great kids, senior players, mentally tough, like you were talking about. Love these guys. I'd go to war with them anywhere, battle anywhere, can deal with pressure, failure. And I remember a kid pitching 100 and I don't know, 120 pitch or
Right.
88 pitches the first day, came back pitching 100 and some the next
I've
day.
seen it.
Uh,
Yeah.
and the question was I was a consultant at the time. The question was, do we take him out of this game? It was a European championship. Do we take him out of this game? I said, look, guys, I'm going to tell you what I would do. He's out, win or lose, he's out. I knew that he can get the next guy out and we would probably win the game on that, but I wasn't going to sacrifice his arm. And they would have to make that choice because my advice was, sorry, it's not worth the European. I don't care what European championship it is. It's
Right.
just not worth that 20-year-old to get hurt. He might have a
Right.
chance to go further and do some things.
Absolutely. And that's how important this coach education stuff is because I would see things just like that in a lot of countries, even up in Sweden when I was there. I was just like, we'd have to pretty much stop the game and say, look, we gotta let's do a pitch count for the innings. That's what we came up with for the younger ages is let's max out the pitches for these young guys at 20 pitches per inning. let's roll the inning, and then let's put the base runners back on. Like we would just get creative with the fact that we didn't want a kid going out there and having a 50 pitch inning, and then the next inning he go out and pitch again, or maybe he's the catcher the next inning, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen that like at European championships. I've seen that in Eastern European a lot with the leagues. Um, they're getting better about getting the pitch counts, you know, they're getting better about the education of what the USA, you know, LTAD and pitch
Yep.
count
Yeah,
rules are.
MLB. Sure.
But that's just education, you know, like that's just straight education and getting information into the coach's hands.
And
So,
Andy, we've had to do that in the U.S. I mean, we're not just talking about Europe. I mean, the
yeah,
Japanese, we were just talking about on our last show. I've been to Japan 20, 30 times, and I love it's one of my favorite baseball systems. But yet, you know, to them, they had an unlimited pitch count in high school baseball. I've had guys pitch 450 pitches on a weekend for me, you know, for, not for me, but in Japan that played for me. And they just went to a rule where they can go to 500 pitches a week, and they thought that was progress. But when in an older system, it's more traditional. That is progress, unfortunately. But so it's not just in Europe. It's not just in. It's also in the U.S. And I think, like you said, the more educational programs we have, then the better coaches, especially at the young levels. We need to train coach, and that's why I love what you guys are doing. I mean, we're all working towards coaches that are working with young kids, because as we create great habits, then things are
absolutely,
going to be much easier. Um,
absolutely.
Now, I do want to ask you this: as a manager, you know, you're going in up against some pretty good teams in the World Baseball Classic qualifier. You know, these kids that you're dealing with are mentally tougher, which I think you're ahead of the curve now, because they're going to deal with some failure. Um, Take us into some team conversations prior to a game, if you do have some, or even after a ball game, whether it be a win or a loss, some things that you might discuss and recommend the coaches and how they handle this, because sometimes we handle that incorrectly too.
Yeah, that's an unbelievable. That's a really good question because I keep thinking about I've evolved as a coach. Like when I first started coaching, I was like 30, you know, just starting to get into coaching at 30, right? And I didn't know a lot, and I was like I spent too much time on the field arguing with umpires versus like going and you know you know what I mean, coaching the players and learning that you know that was more important than this individual argument with an umpire. So like I've evolved a lot of the time. So I'm still getting better at it. Like when it comes to showing like a positive and a mindset and a body language to these guys to let them know that like, hey, we might be down 5-2 in this game, but like I'm still working on this. And this is what it's all managers can work on is like they look at you for confidence at sometimes. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so if your head is down and if you're showing body language and stuff, I'm trying to get better at this as I get better as a coach. Um, but trying to like I've read this somewhere that our number one job as a coach is to just to give the player confidence, either the individual player or the actual team itself. And so I can think back like when we were in October at the Olympic qualifier, we had Italy on the ropes, and no one expected that. Like that first game, we wound up I think it was 4-4, and then the rain came, and so it got delayed. But like what we didn't know at the time is if we'd have just scored one more run or held them to one less run, the game would have been over because of the rain delay, and we would have won in a shortened game, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So like you take that moment, and then after the game, I remember we went into the locker room, and the guys are just frustrated because they felt like they had them on the ropes, but like you have a conversation with them and said, gentlemen, like we are in such a good position here. Like nobody expected us to be here. They never expect us to be here, but you guys always find a way to do it. And you can see like their body language get better
Mm.
and better. And then saying, okay, this is what we didn't execute that well in the first half of this game. And let's try to do our best coming back. Obviously, the next time we're going to finish this game. It didn't wind up going that well. We went into a tiebreaker. It was that close. I love games that are that close to going either way, and like you think about what could have happened and what you could have done differently. But at the end of the day, like all you're trying to do is put them in a position to be in that position, to win, to be confident in that situation. And if I go back to the last classic, coaching with these guys in Australia, they were the underdogs there as well. Like no one expected them to go and play competitively against Australia, full of pro guys.
Sure.
We had a few guys. And next thing you know, it's a toe-to-toe battle. And even in the final, we jumped out to like a 4-1 lead or something. And it like they just had a presence about them. And a lot of it had to do with pre-game talks, you know,
Yeah.
pre-game talks saying, look, you guys deserve to be here. You know, we know you have a chip on your shoulder because when you go back home, you don't have baseballs to use and you don't have batting cages to use. And but your toughness is better than anybody at this tournament. And that's what's going to carry you. So we'd have these conversations. We'd also do a lot of advanced scouting. Like we'd find film of pitchers that we were facing. Like that tournament, we were going to face Travis Blackley, a former pro lefty with Australia. And we had video of him that showed his, you know, his mechanics. And then like his out pitch was this big 12-6 curveball. So like guys saw him visually. I don't know about visual learner. Like I really respond to like seeing a picture, kind of seeing and feeling more comfortable. And like we had a little huddle around looking at Blackley's stuff, and Gift and Gope led off the game with a bomb against Blackley. So I'm not saying it worked,
Well,
but it was
he was a
pretty
lot
cool.
more prepared.
Exactly. Like, and that's the name of the game. Like I've learned that from the scouting world. I mean, scouting teaches you so much about the little details of what a guy likes to do in certain counts as a pitcher and what a manager likes to do, you know, when, you know, you got a situation. So those are the best, Pete, those are the best moments, man. Those are the best moments when you're with the team and like you can tell they're either up or down, and then you figure out a way to keep them even higher, or you take this moment and like you get them at like this playing level that they can go against Australia, they can go against the USA, because in their mind, like they're locked in, you know. They may fail, but they're locked in mentally.
And people that say managers aren't that important, I guess that shows you right there how important a manager is and will always be. And it's interesting you mentioned about the picture that you guys constantly, you know, videotaped and you saw him throwing, because I had a friend of mine, Pat Reed with Visual Edge, earlier had asked a question we didn't get to because of the interruption. He asked a question about doing things visually. What do you do to, you know, visual exercises to train the athletes? Well, to me, that's one right there. Talk about visual training, seeing the picture over and over and over again. What else can you give recommendations on that can help, you know, when it comes to training? Maybe some visual stuff, or even, you know, on deck, you know, or anything else that you can do when it comes to the visual aspect of the game.
Visually, like I learned a lot of stuff during my MLB days. We would have like actual visual training where like the players were responding to, you know, seeing like a dot on the ball. Like the best hitters in the world have the best vision. Like Ted Williams had unbelievable vision, which we all know, like pilot vision. And like, so you train that, like you train seeing the spin of the ball, and you work on that in batting practice. There's a lot of visual drills that you can do. Like we do it on defense where we turn the infielder around. This is a younger player's drill. I learned a lot. You turn the player around so he's not seeing anything, and then roll a ball to him and call ball, and he's got to turn and find the ball and get in the right position. But you're basically blinded. Yeah, you're blinded until the moment that you have to find the ball with your eyes. And I don't think we train that enough. We would do a lot of stuff, you know, just like an eye doctor would do. I mean, we had vision specialists come in and tell us a lot of stories about how big league hitters were just needing glasses or contacts, and that was a game changer for their game, you know. So there's a bunch of drills that we started to learn. I learned a lot from Jeff Kershell because that was part of our rotation. They do strength and conditioning exercises, and then there was a visual drill, for example. So, yeah.